Feared across Nazi-occupied Europe, the name Gestapo was synonymous with terror and violence. Their violent practices, brutal interrogations, and constant surveillance shattered the lives of thousands of women. While in their custody, prisoners of the Gestapo faced psychological torment and violence without mercy, all designed to break the human spirit. Join us as we reveal the horrific reality endured by the many women who suffered at the hands of the Gestapo. The Gestapo, or Geheime Staatspolizei, was Nazi Germany's secret state police. Established in 1933, the Gestapo soon became one of the most feared organizations in Germany. Under the authority of Hermann Göring and later Heinrich Himmler, the Gestapo was a tool of oppression and terror designed to eliminate all opposition to Adolf Hitler's regime. The Gestapo's main aim was to locate, expose, suppress, and destroy the enemies of the Nazi regime. This included political opponents, resistance members, communists, Jews, and any other minority groups considered to be undesirable, such as Jehovah's Witnesses and homosexuals. They had total freedom when it came to powers of arrest and execution. They operated outside the boundaries of normal law enforcement, enjoying incredible amounts of power, and were able to incarcerate people without the need for an investigation or trial. The Gestapo's methods were infamous for their extreme violence, and many women suffered under their iron fist. Women of all ages, the very young to the very elderly, were arrested and subjected to prolonged, violent interrogation. They suffered relentless beatings, electrocution, mock executions, and constant deprivation of sleep. The Gestapo's methods aimed to break the individual's spirit and instill fear, to encourage their victims to share information regarding resistance to the Nazi regime. The Gestapo relied heavily on sympathetic informants to supply them with information regarding dissidents. These informants could be neighbors, colleagues, and even family members. The Gestapo worked hand in hand with the SS, the Schutzstaffel, and played an important role in the Holocaust by organizing the mass deportations of Jewish men, women, and children to concentration and extermination camps. When stationed in occupied territories, the Gestapo focused on locating resistance movements, which they did by interrogating and torturing anyone who might have information. By the end of the war, the Gestapo had become synonymous with fear, cruelty, and inhumanity. Rose Besser. Rose Besser was a young Jewish girl in Poland during the Nazi occupation. As a 15-year-old girl, she suffered a harrowing ordeal at the hands of the Gestapo. Her experiences with the Gestapo began when she was caught illegally selling goods on the black market to help support her family. Upon being caught, she was accused of being a swindler and taken captive by a German policeman. Rose was taken straight to the local Gestapo headquarters. After refusing to provide her interrogator with any information, she was thrown into a dark basement where she landed on a group of fellow prisoners. In total darkness, Rose realized she was surrounded by other Jews, many of whom had been arrested for similar offenses, such as selling produce without the correct paperwork. Later that evening, the prisoners were herded into a waiting van and told they were being sent to Auschwitz. They were told that if they revealed important information, their lives would be spared and they would not be deported to the concentration camp. However, Rose was a local, and she soon realized that they were actually being taken to Bedzin instead, where she was imprisoned for the next 3 weeks. During her captivity, Rose was uncertain of what her fate would be. Her family did not know where she was, and she feared being eventually sent to a concentration camp. One day, while in her cell, Rose noticed a delivery man who she recognized to be a Jew. She asked him to inform her aunt, who lived nearby, so her family could be informed of what had happened to her and that she had not been killed or deported. She was eventually released after 21 days, coinciding with the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah, which was also her birthday. Despite her close call with death, she continued selling goods after her release, as it was the only way to provide for her family. Alice van Steenberg. Alice van Steenberg joined the French resistance in 1941 after being removed from her position as a medical inspector due to her membership of the French Communist Party. After some time with the resistance, she was appointed as the departmental health chief of the Army Secrète and later as the assistant to the national head of the Gallia RPA, two powerful factions of the French resistance. Alice played a pivotal role in the fight against the Nazi occupation. However, her work came at a heavy cost. After 3 years of working with the resistance, Alice was captured by the Gestapo in August of 1944. She was imprisoned in the infamous Montluc prison in Lyon. Over a number of weeks, she endured endless torture at the hands of her captors, including the notorious Gestapo agent Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon, whose most heinous crime was deporting a group of 44 Jewish children to Auschwitz, where they were immediately executed. The interrogations were incredibly brutal, and Alice experienced beatings so harsh that she was left disabled for life with 5 broken vertebrae. Despite the violence, she always refused to betray her fellow resistance fighters. Her bravery ensured the survival of her resistance network, which continued its operations until the liberation of France. Alice spent just over 3 weeks in prison, being freed on August the 24th, with the city of Lyon being liberated just over a week later. She reunited with her husband, returned to her home, and resumed her life, now permanently disabled. Irina Sendler. Irina Sendler was a member of the Polish resistance who began her work against the Nazi occupation immediately after the conquest of Poland by providing false documents to Polish soldiers and Jews. By 1943, Sendler's organization was helping to hide Jewish children and aiding Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. Her home was raided by the Gestapo, who were searching for information regarding her resistance activities, and Sendler was arrested. Taken to Pawiak prison, she endured almost a month of beatings and interrogations, leaving her with broken legs and feet. Her interrogator demanded the names of fellow members of Zagota, the Council for the Aid of Jews. The information she gave him had been prearranged and was false. She was sentenced to death by firing squad and sent away for execution. In a surprise twist of fate, Zagota had bribed the German guard tasked with executing her, and she was set free. After the war, she began her next task, reuniting the hidden children with their living relatives. Denise Vernet. Denise Vernet, an active member of the French resistance, faced unimaginable brutality after being captured by the Gestapo in Lyon. Known by the fake names Annie and Miarka, she survived relentless torture and grueling conditions as her captors sought to break her spirit and extract information about her resistance network. Her ordeal began with the infamous torture of the bathtub. Denise was plunged into a bath of icy water, her hands bound behind her back, and her head forcibly held underwater until she was just on the verge of drowning. Just before death, she was dragged back to the surface, and she was asked the same questions as before. If she refused to speak, she was immediately forced underwater once again. As her body reached its limits, Gestapo agents revived her with strong coffee or brandy, only so that she may continue to experience her torture. Denise continued to be tortured, but refused to expose any of her comrades in the resistance. Her senior officer, George Ostier, had so much faith in her that she would not reveal any information that he did not even worry to change his alias or address. Denise Vernet was deported to the Mauthausen concentration camp as part of the Night and Fog program, where she faced execution. Her life was saved when the Red Cross organized a release of female prisoners. Renee Bornstein. Renee Bornstein was just a young girl when the war broke out and endured a period of unimaginable terror at the hands of the Gestapo. Her experiences with the Gestapo began near the Swiss border when her group, led by a Jewish girl guide and French resistance worker named Marianne Cohn, attempted to escape France, which had recently been occupied by Nazi forces. Despite their best efforts to pose as a group on a holiday trip, German officers intercepted them, repeatedly repeatedly asking them, "Are you Jewish?" Renee, her sister Helen, and the others all denied being Jewish, but the Gestapo sent them to DuPont prison in Annemasse. It was here that Renee faced the full horror of the Nazi regime. She was taken to an empty room by Gestapo Chief Commandant Meyer. Inside, she saw a young boy, Leon Sunstein, lying on a plank, his body battered from relentless beatings. The Gestapo officers pointed a gun at her and her sister, threatening that if they did not tell the truth, they would be beaten. Renee repeated her false story, denying that she was Jewish and inventing a fake identity. The officers seemed to believe her, and she avoided any physical violence. Her guide, Marianne Cohn, however, was not spared. Every morning she was taken from her cell for interrogation, and every evening, after hours of brutal treatment, she returned to her cell with her face swollen and red. She was tortured with hot and cold water and beaten so ferociously that her face was left deformed. Marianne had every chance to save herself by revealing the young girls' identities, but she refused. Her actions saved Renee and the other girls' lives, but cost her her own, as she was eventually executed by the Gestapo. In August 1944, the Lord Mayor of Annemasse negotiated the group's release, saving Renee and her sister from possible execution or deportation to a concentration camp. They reunited with their family and went into hiding for the remainder of the war. Aftermath. The Gestapo met its end with the collapse of the Third Reich in May 1945. Many members were captured, while others went into hiding, pretending to be normal Wehrmacht soldiers or simple civilians, hoping to avoid prosecution for war crimes trials. Many avoided justice and spent the remainder of their lives in peace, while others were tried and prosecuted at the Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg trials began only 6 months after the end of the war in Europe and lasted until October of 1946. The Gestapo was declared a criminal organization responsible for endless war crimes and crimes against humanity. Heinrich Müller, Adolf Eichmann, and other Gestapo and SS members, having managed to escape detection, became the targets of international manhunts, some of which lasted decades. Eichmann, considered one of the chief architects of the Holocaust, was captured by Israeli Mossad agents in 1960 in Argentina. He was executed in Israel in 1962, a major milestone in the post-war attempt to bring the Nazi regime to justice. One of the most infamous Gestapo officers, Klaus Barbie, known as the Butcher of Lyon, was responsible for the torture and brutalization of countless victims, including Alice Van Steenbergen. Barbie eventually fled to South America in 1951, living under an assumed identity for decades. In 1983, he was extradited to France, where he stood trial for crimes against humanity. Convicted in 1987, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, finally facing accountability for his atrocities. The legacy of the Gestapo is one of unchecked state power, a reminder of the atrocities that can unfold under the guidance of totalitarian regimes. Its end marked the fall of one of history's most nefarious institutions ever to have existed, but that did not mean an end to its cruel methods and practices. Since the end of World War II, thousands more women have suffered at the hands of similarly brutal organizations, such as the Stasi in East Germany, the KGB in the Soviet Union, and the Securitate in communist Romania. Even today, people still continue to suffer at the hands of similar groups in places such as North Korea and elsewhere.